Okay, evening everybody. I've been asked to talk tonight about the new roofing or yard covering grant. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to give you a few slides of effectively trying to show you what's eligible, what's not eligible, what are the benefits that you will gain from putting up these roofs, what you need to think about really before you decide on what you want to roof and what you don't want to roof with regards on how that will work with a grant. And I'll do a little bit on what's legal and what's not as well, or what you need to think about with regard to ensuring what you're going to do will be legal. The scheme aims, which Richard will go through in more detail, but the theme that they want to follow are to support improvements on-farm nutrient management and to improve existing on-farm infrastructure through the separation of clean water, rainfall from dirty water, animal slurry, animal manure and silage effluent. So it's effectively trying to reduce the volumes of water that are currently becoming contaminated and are getting involved or having to be stored, thus having to be spread. I think judging by the numbers who've come on to the Zoom meeting, the popularity is obviously there. You know, people are obviously very keen to put up these roofs and to reduce their pollution. So it's either based on the need to improve the environment or the amount of rain I think we all had on the weekend. But either way, it's sort of focused the mind a little bit. So the aims of the FBG are basically to focus on agri-pollution improvements. It's a stepping stone really to help farms get towards regulatory improvement and to reduce the volumes of dirty water they're currently having to hold. They are based around getting the farm closer to current regulation compliance, which is the SAFO regs, or potentially any future regulations that may be around the corner. So every area of roof that you can cover and reduce the volume of water that's falling onto the yards becoming contaminated will benefit your slurry storage capacity. So it's aimed at helping reduce overall slurry and dirty water production. Simply by doing that, you're automatically increasing your available slurry storage capacity. Every drop of rain you can stop going into the slurry store will automatically give you more slurry storage. So the benefits are obvious. And if you've seen the amount of water running off this weekend, well, you know, that tells its own story. So the Farm Business Grant to Roof is basically aimed to help farms achieve or move closer to regulatory compliance. So you may well have had visits from NRW already, or you may have had visits from the likes of me giving advice on reducing clean, dirty water. So this will help get you to where you need to be. The other side of the coin, it will reduce your costs and your need to spread so often. The volumes that are currently collected, you know, you're having to spread them, they're having to go out. Now, the regulatory authorities are looking at, you know, trying to get farms to only spread when there's an agricultural need or when the land requires it, rather than spreading because the slurry store is full and it's got to go. So the roofing grant is a stepping stone really to helping farms reduce their overall volumes and get to where they need to be. As I said, the impact of rainwater contamination. And I don't think many people, because you never see that volume of water in one place, you don't appreciate how big a volume it actually is until you actually break it down. All contaminated rainwater falling onto a dirty yard radiator is classed as slurry. So any yards that you've got that would qualify for this grant, and I'll clarify what those are in a second, is classed as slurry or dirty water, and legally it should be collected and contained. All contaminated rainfall therefore needs to either be entering your slurry store or effluent tank if it's off a clamp. It's not allowed to go down the drain. That would be a breach of the regulation. So, you know, this is what this roofing grant is intended to help. So intercepting the rainfall before it becomes contaminated, thus reducing the volume going in. Existing or any proposed slurry stores that you're thinking of building will need to have the capacity to contain a winter's slurry dirty water production. Now that includes the yard rainfall. So anything that you can take out of that equation by roofing will increase your slurry storage capacity, but theoretically you should already be holding this stuff for up to 4 months if it's SAFO compliant, and possibly longer if regulations change. Now, the majority of the farms I visit, it's always a rainfall problem. You know, there's far more contaminated rainfall than there is actual slurry produced by the stock. So if you look at it from that side of the fence, if you can get help and aid to roof these yards, divert that rainwater away, you're improving your slurry storage capacity, you're reducing your cost of spreading, and you're helping yourself reduce any future costs if you need to increase storage to achieve compliance. Now, this is the type of thing that we see, and I see on all farms, and you know, everybody sees it. It's the damage caused by surface water when it's pouring down, entering a contaminated yard. Once that roof water, you can see in the picture on the left, lands on a contaminated yard, that roof water is slurry, as is all the surface water that falls onto that yard. In this particular case, the yard runoff, it wasn't a particularly big yard, it's flowing straight into the slurry store. And you can see from the volume of water pouring in, that was filling the slurry store up in no time at all. Now, as I said previously, until you calculate that volume and look at the area you're collecting, because you're pumping it out continually, you have no real concept of how much that is. So below, I've just put a simple calculation for your average yard area, you know, as an average rainfall in Wales. A lot of people will be a little bit higher than that. Some people will be a little bit lower. But on your average 300 square meter yard, which is only 100 by 30 feet, that's 252 cubic meters, or 55,000 gallons of surface rainfall that yard is collecting and is classed as slurry. So by roofing that yard area, you're diverting 55,000 gallons of water away from your slurry store, increasing your slurry capacity by that much. So the benefit is massive from it. And you've got to remember that is only over the winter period. That's not all year, that's just the winter period. So when you calculate it backwards, if you've got a 1,200 gallon tanker, you're looking at about 46 tanker loads there of just rain that you're saving by roofing the yard. So the background to this grant is obviously to try and divert as much clean water prior to contamination as we possibly can to increase available slurry storage and reduce the volumes that have to be spread to the land. Okay, I'll just go on to explain what is eligible under the FBG Yard Coverings Grant. Richard will go into more detail as to how you apply and, you know, the ins and outs of it, but this is effectively what you'll be allowed to apply for grant aid for. So the first thing, and probably the most obvious thing, are the livestock feed yards. If you've got external feed yards that your stock have access to feed, as those two examples show there, every drop of rain on that is slurry. So the grant is based around covering that yard, intercepting that rain and diverting it to a clean drain, and ensuring what's underneath that roof goes to a slurry store. You will have to provide photographic evidence of the yard areas before and after, but you will also have to prove that the yard runoff is currently going to the slurry store, and it will continue to go to the slurry store after the improvements are made. So if you've got yard areas now that the runoff is not being collected, that won't be eligible. You've got to ensure that the runoff is being collected within the slurry store and will continue to be collected once the roof is over the yard. The clean water will then be diverted away, so obviously the volume going to the slurry store will be significantly reduced. But you have to prove when you apply for the grant that the runoff is already going to the store. So any livestock feed yards that have to have a concrete floor are eligible. If it's not got a hard, if it hasn't got a concrete floor or an impermeable surface, it won't be eligible. The second area are cattle gathering yards. So you're sort of looking at collecting yards, loafing yards, possibly cattle handling yards. Again, it's got to be impermeable surface. It's got to be shuttered concrete, you know, concrete surface or something else impermeable. It can't be a hardcore surface. The runoff from the gathering yard has got to go to the slurry store now, and you've got to prove that it's going there, either via a drain or via curbing, or it's sloping to it, or you're scraping to it. But you have to be able to prove that it's going there. Again, once it's covered, photographic evidence will need to be taken before and after to ensure that it's the same yard and the fact it's all being collected and contained. The third area that will be popular will be manure or FYM, farmyard manure storage areas. Now, often when I have farm visits or when NRW do their inspections, these areas, FYM stores in particular, cause quite a bit of problem because the farm isn't aware that FYM is in fact slurry if it's stored on an open yard. All runoff from FYM stored on an open yard is classed as slurry and therefore should be going to a slurry store. This is often missed. The point is missed with farms that they don't understand that all runoff is slurry. It's not muck once it's on an open yard. So as long as the muck runoff is being collected within a storage system, then it will be eligible for roofing. If I'm honest, it was quite difficult to find 3 photos of compliant muck stores where the slurry runoff is being collected. So if you've got a muck store and you're thinking of covering it, you're going to need to prove that at the moment, the runoff from that muck store is going to the slurry store. Once the muck store is roofed, there theoretically shouldn't be any runoff from the store, depending on the slope of the floor. If the slope of the floor is still heading towards the front open elevation of the muck store, the runoff will still have to be collected. If the wall floor joint is sealed around the perimeter and it's undercover, and there's no ingress of clean water from outside, then the muck store can be classed as purely a muck store. There'll be no slurry runoff. But any farms that have got a muck store that is open at the moment, they need to be collecting that runoff within a slurry storage system. And theoretically, if that was put in after 1991, that slurry store system should also be compliant with SAFO regs. So it should already be providing 4-month storage. Now, you know, I'm aware that plenty of farms are not in the situation, and the point of roofing is to get them to compliance. But you need to think about where it's going, how it's getting there, and you're going to need to prove this. The fourth area that can be roofed are slurry stores. Now, obviously, roofing a slurry store will significantly increase the storage capacity of that store. Effectively, most slurry stores that are open are collecting about 2.5 feet of rain every winter. So simply by roofing it, you're going to gain 2.5 feet of depth of storage. Now, if these stores were designed properly and passed after 91, they should have 4-month storage. We know, you know, lots of them are struggling with capacity, so roofing them is, you know, will make a difference. But what you've got to be aware of is if you're roofing a slurry store, you've got to ensure that you're not breaching any structural integrity of it, or you're not breaching any SAFO compliance by refurbishing something or improving something beyond what it was originally designed for. Basically, what I'm saying is if you've got a slurry store that you haven't got capacity in, you're putting a roof over it, that store should come up to 4-month storage, and you should also not affect the structural integrity of it. Now, the Welsh Government are advising you contact NRW before you commence any works on this, so that you can clarify that you're not endangering any legal issues with that store. On Richard's presentation later on, he'll be saying applicants will need to inform NRW of any changes to existing manure, slurry or silage stores which could have an impact on the store's SAFO compliance. Now, I understand this is a difficult conversation to have potentially with NRW. You can go through Farming Connect and they will be able to get somebody to give you confidential advice on your situation, because I know it's going to be tricky for a lot of farms to put a roof over a slurry store and achieve compliance or maintain compliance. So if you're not comfortable initially talking to NRW, I would suggest you go through the Farming Connect system and they will be able to help you with putting you in touch with somebody who can give you the advice or help you through the process and say, right, okay, this is what you need to do, or you need to think about this or that. But that will need to be clarified as part of the grant process, okay? So make sure you think it through. But by all means, speak to Irwin and her colleagues, and I'm sure they'll be able to help you. The final one that may be that classifies as can be roofed are silage clamps. Now, again, the whole SAFO compliance situation may well be tricky on these, because there are many clamps that have been built since the regs were introduced and are non-compliant but non-polluting. So there's an element of practicality with NRW looking at this situation, but again, it's the same scenario as the slurry stores. You need to be careful you're not jeopardizing any compliance or affecting any exemption that clamp may have. So if you're thinking of roofing a clamp, again, either speak to NRW or speak to Farming Connect to see whether they can guide you to anybody who can give you the advice on what you can and cannot do. Now, with the silage clamps, you've either got to prove that that runoff is going to a slurry store now and will continue to do so after it's been covered, or it's being piped to an effluent tank that is collecting all the runoff from the clamp. So that will be another situation where you take the photo before, you take the photo after, and prove the flow is still going where it's supposed to be going. If the clamp runoff is going to a slurry store, that slurry store will also need to have the capacity to take the surface rainfall off the clamp as it is today. Obviously, by roofing it, you will take that away and it'll make a lot of difference to your capacity, as we described earlier. So as long as it's being collected at the moment, you should be fine. Once you roof that clamp, then there'll be a significant reduction in volume of contaminated water if it's entering your slurry store. If it's going to a properly designed effluent tank, then you should be fine anyway. But if you need clarification on that, go back through Farm Connect or give NRW a ring and they'll be able to tell you the yeas and nays about where you are with that situation. Right, the one criteria that the grant insists on before the grant will be paid out, you either have to prove that you've got planning approval for the roof that you want to put up, or you need some sort of evidence from the local authority that you don't need planning approval. So in some cases it'll be full planning permission, in some cases it'll be prior notification, and in some cases, depending on the size, location and what's there now, it may not need planning permission at all. But you need to get the permission sorted before you can claim the grant, okay? Now, in the current COVID situation, I deal with the planners regularly. It's quite a long drawn out process at the moment. The planning application isn't long and drawn out, it's the time period they're taking to go through the application. Roofing should be a lot simpler than slurry storage. At the moment, I've got a lot of slurry storage applications in, but that is more of an NRW hold-up than a planning hold-up, to be fair. Planning permission for the roof should be relatively straightforward if the correct information is put in. But you're going to need something from the local authority, either planning approval an email back for them to say you don't need planning or a prior notification. Now, the other additional thing is SUDS. This is relatively new and a lot of people may not be familiar with it. It's not something that the Welsh Assembly have just brought in to add another loop to jump through. It's something that has been part of the planning process now for probably about 18 months plus. So SUDS stands for a Sustainable Urban Drainage Scheme. It effectively means if you're building a roofed area over 100 square meters, you've got to apply for SUDS approval from the local authority. Now, most local authorities will pass the planning permission, but they'll condition it with saying you can't start on site until you get SUDS approval. And the grant will require evidence of SUDS approval also. Now, the SUDS approval is basically looking at how you control that roof water when you let it out of the downpipes. You are no longer allowed to just let it go into a ditch, into a clean drain, and just quietly flow away. You've got to provide a SUDS report to show how you're going to mitigate the flow rate. It's effectively showing how fast the water's going, how you're controlling that flow, how you're looking after the flow rate, and where it's eventually disposing. It's something that's unavoidable. I think initially agriculture got brought into it by default. It was originally aimed at housing developments where they had a lot of runoff from roofs, roads and drives. So they put in a standard 100 square meters, but agriculture's just been included by default, and it is unavoidable, I'm afraid. But it isn't something Welsh Government have just added. It is something that is legislative and we can't get around it. So that basically covers what's eligible, what's not eligible, and what you need to think about as well, okay? So consider where you are in your current farm situation. Consider where you are with compliance. By all means, speak to somebody confidentially if you want to before you go any further, or speak to NRW if you've got concerns. But otherwise, that is the basic grant system as it stands now. We've got a questions section at the end, but I think Richard is going to go through the how you apply it and some more sort of criteria of the grant. But if there's any questions we can answer at the end, I think you can email them in and we'll do our best to go through as many as we can. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Keith. Diolch yn fawr, Keith. I could see there's some questions coming in. There was one question there regarding how do you ask questions and is it raising hands? Actually, there's no function to raise hands in this meeting. So if you can type in your questions through the Q&A tab, we'll take the questions at the end. But I am aware, you know, they're coming in quite fast at the moment. So if at all, you know, if you were not able to answer all of them tonight, we will provide written answers. We'll group them together and there'll be a sheet that we'll be uploading to the Farming Connect website as soon as we can after the meeting tonight, so that everyone can see the answers to the questions that have been asked. There was also, I think, 2 people had difficulties with the translation at the beginning. I hope that's been sorted now, so I'm going to switch back to Welsh. If you're still having trouble, then please send in another comment and then I'll switch back to English. So I'm just going to share a screen with you. Keith mentioned now that you know the help available through Farming Connect. So na I just mynd yn bras trwyddo cyngor a'r help sydd ar gael trwy Cyswllt Ffermio. Na, ni eisoes wedi cwrdd gyda un o'r arbenigwyr sydd ar gael gyda ni, sef Keith Owen, ond byddwn ni'n licio bwysleisio bod gyda ni arbenigwyr eraill hefyd sydd yn gallu rhoi cyngor. Mae'r 8 cwmni sydd lan yma, EDAS, Andersons, Agripan Cymru, Cara, Promar, Kite a Lansker I gyd ar gael trwy gwasanaeth cynghori Cyswllt Ffermio. Mae'r gwasanaeth cynghori yn cynnig hyd at €6,000 o gyngor i pob busnes ffarm. Felly, wi ddim yn gwybod os ydych chi wedi manteisio ar y cyngor yma ar hyn o bryd, ond dyn ni'n licio annog chi wneud achos mae'r arian yma ar gael i cyswllt ffermio yn ystod y cynllun cyswllt ffermio presennol. A mae'n bosib byddwn ni'n rhedeg mas o arian rhywbryd, a felly cyntaf i'r felin yw mae yna 4 cyfle gyda chi i gael cyngor ar eich ffarm. Mae gyda ni fel o'n i'n sôn, dros 100 o ymgynghorwyr ar gael yn cyfro gwahanol bynciau wedyn o fewn y gwasanaeth cynghori. A mae'r gefnogaeth wedi cael ei deilwra i gyflawni beth bynnag yw'r busnes uwch amcanion chi yn eich busnes. Mae'r pynciau yn amrywio o gynllunio busnes i arallgyfeirio i rheoli y tir, a hefyd wrth gwrs beth ni'n trafod yma heno, sef yr ochr adeiladwaith. Beth sy'n bwysig fel mae Keith wedi nodi mewn gwirionedd yw bod y cyngor yma yn annibynnol ac yn hollol gyfrinachol. Mae'r adroddiad sy'n cael ei wneud yn gyfan gwbl dim ond rhwngddo chi, y ffarmwr, a yr ymgynghorydd. Dyw e ddim yn cael ei rannu gyda neb arall. Dwi'n bersonol ddim yn gweld yr adroddiad sy'n cael ei wneud. Mae'r cwbl yn gyfrinachol. Hefyd, byddwn ni'n licio sôn ynglyn â cymorthfeydd sydd ar gael gyda ni. Os ych chi'n teimlo bod cael ymgynghorydd allan ar y ffarm, mae yna, fel o'n i'n sôn, cymorth i gael. Os chi'n cael cyngor 1 i 1, mae fe'n 80% wedi cael ei gyllido, ond os chi'n gweithio fel grŵp, mae fe'n gyfan gwbl am ddim. Ond os ych chi ddim yn meddwl bod chi angen i gael hynny, a falle yna gyd sydd â chi yw cwestiwn byr i chi moyn gofyn i ryw ymgynghorydd, i ni yn cynnig cymorthfeydd 1 awr gydag arbenigwr. Achos yr pandemig, mae'r cyngor yma yn cael ei roi yn ddigidol, naill ai dros y ffôn neu ar ryw safle tebyg i hwn. A mae dyn ni amrywiaeth o bynciau. Allwch chi gael awr gyda rhywun fel Keith Owen, neu allwch chi gael awr gyda cyfrifydd neu gyda cyfreithiwr. Beth bynnag yw'r pwnc sydd gyda chi, gallwch chi gael awr am ddim. Felly, mae'n bosib bod gyda chi rhywbeth sy'n cysylltiedig â'r grant yma, licech chi jyst gael sgwrs byr ar y ffôn, jyst i drafod beth bynnag yw'ch problem chi. Y neges yw cysylltwch gyda ni yn cyswllt ffermio, naill ai drwy'ch swyddog datblygu lleol neu drwy'r ganolfan wasanaeth sydd gyda ni. Felly dyna yn fras yr help sydd ar gael trwy cyswllt ffermio. Felly hoffwn ni nawr fynd ymlaen at ein siaradwr nesaf, sef Richard Evans o Lywodraeth Cymru. Mae Richard yn gweithio yn tîm amaeth Llywodraeth Cymru, a fe sydd wedi bod yn arwen ar y gwaith o lunio yr cynllun grant newydd yma. Felly, pwy well i gael yn y cyfarfod heno na Richard. Croeso cynnes iawn i chi, Richard, a ni'n edrych ymlaen i glywed mwy am sut mae mynd ati i roi cais mewn.
Diolch yn fawr. Diolch yn fawr, Iwan. Noswaith dda pawb. Good evening. I'll be doing the first part of this presentation in Welsh and then probably turn to English halfway through. Felly, diolch yn fawr, Iwan. Gyda cyflwyniad Keith yn mynd mor dda, fi credu mae fe wedi mwy na ddau dweud yn union beth yw'r cynllun a beth yn fras beth yw'r cynlluniau, beth dyn ni'n trial wneud. Felly, beth dwi'n bwriadu wneud yw just mynd trwyddo rhai o'r prosesau, rhai o'r rheolau cynllun. Dwi ddim yn bwriadu mynd i llawer o fanylion. Mae'r canllawiau llawn ar gael ar y gwefan ac yn y blaen nawr. Felly mae'r wybodaeth i gyd yna. A gobeithio gadael digon amser ar y diwedd i gwestiynau. Felly, mae hwn yn ailadrodd chydig o'r beth mae Keith wedi dweud mewn ffordd. Pwrpas y cynllun yma yw gwella rheoli maetholion ar ffermydd, ond drwy wneud hynna trwy gwella isadeiledd y ffarm sydd yna'n barod. Felly, nid adeiladu styri pits neu storfeydd newydd, ond i wella fe sydd yn barod. A'r bwriad, wrth gwrs, yw gwahanu dŵr glaw oddi wrth dŵr brwnt a slurry. Felly, o ran cynllun, mae'r nod yn weddol syml ac weddol glir. mae wedi sefydlu ar gynllun costau safonol, lle fel yr FBG, y grant bach i ffermydd presennol, felly mae rhan fwyaf ni'n cyfarwydd am hwnna. Ac y grant, yr uchafswm y grant yn yr un peth, 12,000 gyda'i isafswm yn 2,000. Ac mae'r canran o ran y grant yn erbyn y buddsoddiad yn 40%. Felly mae hwnna'n debyg iawn, dim gwahaniaeth yna. Falle'r un sydd pawb diddordeb yno yw faint yw'r grant. Mae'r cost safonol yn 90 pint y medr sgwâr. Felly mae hwnna'n gweithio allan yn grant o 36 pint y medr sgwâr o do sy'n cael ei osod. Jyst i nodi, bod ni'n defnyddio y model o ran y grant busnes i ffermydd, mae hwn yn grant ar wahân. Felly, os bod na fusnesau wedi derbyn grant eisoes, a wedi cael uchafswm 12,000 trwy'r grant presennol, dyw hwnna ddim yn effeithio ar y grant yma, dyn ni'n dechrau o dechrau, felly mae yna 12,000 arall mewn ffordd ar y gael. Felly, does dim gwahaniaeth yn hynna. Ac un peth arall, bod ni'n yma heno, dwi ddim yn orfodol fel oedd yn y grant busnes i ffermydd i fynd i ddigwyddiad ffermio'r dyfodol. Fi'n amlwg bod ni'n cysylltu mwy o ffermydd trwy'r system yma na byswn ni trwy'r cyfarfodydd, ond felly mae hynna wedi newid. Felly o ran pwy sydd yn gallu gwneud cais, mae rhaid wneud cais trwy RPW ar-lein, felly mae eisiau cyfeirniad cwsmer arnoch chi. Mae angen i chi fod yn cynhyrchu cynnyrch amaethyddol. Fod hefyd wedi gallu dangos bod chi yn gwneud dros 550 oriau llafur, felly standard labour hours yn ochr amaethyddol, a'r trosiant yn llai na miliwn. Felly mae hwnna yr un canllawiau a beth sydd gyda'r grant busnes bach presennol. Felly, o ran yr eitemau, mae Keith eisoes wedi dangos hynna o beth sydd yn...
Can I interrupt you, Richard? Sorry, I can see that some people are still having trouble with the translation, so I'm really sorry, but can you switch to English?
Yeah, no problem, that's fine. So, just to recap on a couple of things, I'm sure you've read those. Well, it's probably the main ones that you were interested in is the actual grant rate, which works out at £36 per metre of roofing erected. The remainder really is to just confirm that the rules are very similar to the current FBG, and to be eligible, it's the same requirements really. So in terms of the eligible items, there are two sets of items, primary items and secondary items. The ones that Keith mentioned earlier, those are the roofing items, so we'll class them as primary items, the 5 items areas listed there. And if you apply for one of those items, you can then also apply for secondary items, and these would be lower value items such as rainwater goods, drains, sleeping policemen, rainwater harvesting system, for instance. But you cannot apply for those unless you actually apply for a roofing cover. The secondary items would be for existing buildings. So if you have a current shed with guttering that needs updating or needs to be repaired, or if when you're installing the roof that you need to divert rainwater from entering that part of the yard through a track or from another area, we can support those through these additional items. So again, I'm repeating what Keith said, but I think it's worth mentioning them again. The floor has to be impermeable to water. So, and this has to be evidenced through a geotype photograph. Again, I apologize if I'm repeating, but it is important. you need to inform NRW of any changes to existing manure, slurry or silage stores, just to make sure that you're aware of the impact on the SAFO compliance. And separate rainwater must be diverted from a store, and slurry from the collecting area must be collected. So in terms of submitting applications through RPW online, if you've looked at the current FBG application or have made an application, it's very similar. It's easy to navigate and very difficult, well, not difficult, almost impossible to make a mistake, because it will send you an error message if you've included a figure or something that doesn't look right at all. All the applications we get, we will score and rank them according to the scoring criteria. Now, just to focus a bit on the scoring, the method of scoring is published in the guidance, so that is there for you to view and look. The different roofing areas are ranked. So the livestock feeding areas would be the highest scoring, then collecting yards, manure storage, slurry stores, and then silage stores. So in that order. The secondary items are not scored. The scoring based on the items are then combined with score on your location, and this will be based on water quality and quantity maps that we currently use for Gloucester Advanced. So a combination of those scores will give us a final score that we'll be ranking from 1 down to whatever number of applications we get, and then we'll go down the list based on that score until the budget has been utilised. If your EOI is selected, you will be offered a contract through RPW Online, and you will have 21 days to accept the contract. If you don't accept the contract, that is withdrawn, and the next person on the list will be offered a contract, and so on and so forth until the budget is gone. Once you accept the contract, you have 12 months from the date of the contract to complete the work and submit a claim. So just to be clear, there's 12 months from the contract and not from the EOI window opening. So it's not from the 9th of November, it'll be early in 2021 where the contracts will be coming out. So then hopefully once receiving the contract, you can carry on with the work and it'll be completed. The claim then will be submitted through RPW Online using the standard Capital Works claim page. You will have to complete and purchase all the items that that are in your contract. And then, very similar to the current FBG, we'll need to evidence through an invoice that the work has been done. The invoice will also need to include the roof area, the geotag photographs to show that the roof has been erected, and the geotag photograph showing that the redirected rainwater, where it's been redirected, and where the slurry or effluent is collected, where it's been diverted to. Also an accountant letter confirming that the turnover is less than £1 million, evidence of planning and evidence of SUD. So that's very similar, except for the geotag guidance, exactly the same as the FBG. So key messages, clear photographs. We have developed the scheme to be as simple as possible to deliver, as simple as possible for applicants to apply for it. We're avoiding having to come out at the application stage to make an assessment of the area. We're doing that through photographs. So my message would be, please, clear photographs which shows the area, the flooring, and the outflow, just so that we can make an assessment easily and quickly. We know that getting planning permission and SUDS approval takes time. So I would encourage you to start as early as possible. There is a second window of this grant opening in May. I would ask you not to wait until May. If you're considering making an application, start the planning or considering what you're doing as soon as possible. And considering the geotagged photographs in terms of where the rainwater is going and where the slurry is going, consider it at the beginning, because when it comes to the claim stage, unless we can see the evidence of that one, we won't be able to pay on the claim. Full guidance has been published. It's on the Welsh Government website. So the links are there. I think the links have also been sent to you for everyone that's registered on this call. So I think questions. We'll open the floor to questions.
Diolch yn fawr Richard am y cyflwyniad yna, ac bod ni'n cael chydig o drafferth gyda'r cyfieithu, mae croeso chi anfon cwestiynau mewn yn Gymraeg a na I gyfieithu nhw i'n siaradwyr ni. Yes, we'll move on to the questions. So there's quite a few coming in, but we're grouping them, and if there's duplicates there, we are grouping them so that we are not repeating ourselves. So we'll start with the first one then. Richard, perhaps this one's for you. Basically, if you don't have a current slurry store, you're not eligible. Is that true?
If you're producing slurry, so for instance, if you have a manure storage area, you might you might not have what we call a traditional slurry store, but the effluent from that area will need to be collected. So it's what's your definition of a slurry store in this instance, really. So if you are a beef farmer potentially without a traditional slurry store, if you are roofing a manure storage area, you will need to evidence that the effluent from that area is being collected in a compliant way.
Okay, thank you, Richard. Next question, does it matter when you applied for the planning permission for the covering of an existing manure store? So I'm guessing if somebody has already applied, is that okay?
Yes. Yes. Simple answer.
Well, simple answer. I like those. What is the definition of a dirty yard?
A dirty yard is where there's slurry on the yard which needs to be collected. So where livestock is going on the yard, producing manure, producing slurry, that is a dirty yard.
It's effectively a yard that is used by livestock, that have ad lib access to by livestock. So if it's a feed yard and stock can access the yard to feed, that's a dirty yard. If they're guided onto a collecting yard, that's a dirty yard. If it's a track where they're actually traveling from A to B, that can be different. But if they've got ad lib access to use that yard and they can get on and off it, that is classed as a dirty yard then. Okay. Can I comment on the FOM storage one as well?
Yes, of course.
Well, yeah, what Richard was saying was correct, but a lot of the FOM stores may be old stores with exempt pre-SAFO compliant tanks. So if that's been there before they introduced the regs, and this tends to be the case with a lot of muck stores, and that is the collection facility, and it's not classed as a slurry store per se, but it's still collecting slurry, that may be an exempt structure under the regulation. So it's not illegal as long as it's being controlled, not overflowing, and they're emptying it. So yes, that would fit into the criteria of the grant then.
Okay. Thank you both for the answers. Is the grant aimed solely at dairy and beef farmers, or does the grant include covering concrete yards used for gathering of sheep by sheep farmers? I think this type of question has come in more than once. Are sheep farmers eligible?
If we go back to the scheme, to the aims of the scheme, it's to reduce slurry volumes and reduce pollution. So if a sheep yard is used infrequently, with minimal slurry produced, the question I would ask with those applicants would be, is that slurry being collected now? So are they dealing with that yard as they're producing slurry and it's being collected? If it is being collected and it goes to a store, that would mean then, well, actually putting a roof over it will actually reduce that slurry, the amount of slurry going to the store. But if it's not being collected, putting a roof over it is not going to reduce the slurry capacity. So I think in that the question on those would be, is the farm dealing with that area as a dirty yard and collecting the slurry?
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to the next questions. Are reception pits eligible? Richard?
Yes, I would say so, yes, because, you know, you're effectively reducing the volume of surface water. That is, you know, if you've got an open reception pit, yes, you know, by roofing it, you're preventing the contamination of the rainfall, and you're reducing, you know, your overall slurry production.
I agree with you, Keith. It's, you know, obviously there's a size here on what you might find with a small reception pit is that you won't meet the minimum grant criteria, so the £3,000 expenditure. So it depends on the size of the collecting pit, but in terms of if it's stopping rainwater entering the slurry store, yes, it's eligible.
We have, you know, I've been on a few farms now where, you know, where a lot of farms have installed satellite lagoons and they've got the reception pit linked to the buildings and they'll pump out to there. So in that scenario, yes, you know, it may be a little bit larger than your average reception pit, so it would be a benefit and it would qualify, I would say.
Yeah, in those circumstances, yes. You know, so that absolutely yes.
Okay, thank you. Would a bale stack on a concrete pad qualify when there is an effluent tank collecting the water off the pad? I'm not sure.
Would say that again, sorry.
Yes, would a bale stack on a concrete pad qualify when has an effluent tank collecting the water off pad?
If they're wrapped bales on a pad, there's no requirement for them to have an effluent tank in the first place, as long as the bales are stored on a hard standing more than 10 meters away from a ditch or a watercourse. There's no requirement legally to collect. If the bales are on within a clamp, that's a different scenario. But with the bales, no, I don't think it wouldn't fit into the criteria, because there's no
a silage bale storage area would not be eligible because they would not be producing the effluent, a significant volume of effluent that goes to a silage store.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. If we're not answering the questions as you'd like, you know, please send in any supplementary questions as well, and we'll deal with those either before the end of this webinar, or, as I said, you know, written answers after the webinar tonight. So we'll move on to the next one. So a pre-1991 silage pit covering would not be eligible. Is that true?
Theoretically, if you're working to cover a pre-91 silage clamp and would be regarded legally as substantial reconstruction of that clamp, so you should then bring the whole clamp up to compliance. The majority of pre-91 clamps are possibly going to be earth bank, which are going to be difficult to roof anyway. On a concrete clamp, if you're thinking of roofing a concrete walled clamp, to bring that up to compliance is easier. But I would imagine they will look at it as with an element of practicality. There are also the situation where you've got clamps that are sharing party walls with other buildings, so you can't bring the whole thing up to compliance. NRW are being practical about it at the moment, but any new clamp would need to comply. So I think you'd have to look at that as an individual basis, see what type of clamp it is, whether it's an earth bank or a concrete, and then make the assessment from there. But theoretically, if the clamp is a concrete structure, isn't causing pollution, and NRW are happy that it's still, you know, it's obviously going to reduce the volumes coming off it by roofing it, I would have thought that would comply.
Okay, thank you, Kate. Next question, perhaps for you, Richard. Can planning fees and SUDS costs be included in grant claims?
No. The grant is just a grant, a standard cost towards the roof, the area of roof covered.
Okay, thank you. Can you place a cover over a slurry pit rather than a roof?
No. It is a permanent structure with girders, purlings, and sheets. So it's not a. So it is a. In the guidance, we define what the roof is. So it's not a cover, not a cover or a flexible cover. I just mentioned here as well. Or the item has to be new. So second-hand materials is not eligible. And the roofing, if it's manufactured off-site, will have to be quality marked, so CE marked from the factory. There is opportunity for farmers to build their own structures from new materials, but they will have to provide an engineer certificate to show that meets the standards. But it still have to show the invoices for the materials and everything involved in it, and it has to be new materials.
Okay, thank you, Richard. Why does SPG scheme allow funding to assist a business to become SAFO compliant, but under FPG's roofing grant, under the FPG roofing grant, you are not eligible unless you can demonstrate you are already SAFO compliant? This is a massive issue which excludes the majority of the hundreds of businesses who have shown an interest tonight.
As SPG doesn't fund people to become SAFO compliant. If you went for a slurry store under SPG, that slurry store would have to have over SAFO compliance in its own right. You can't add to a slurry store under SPG to get to compliance. The whole point of it was that, which was the initial argument with SPG, was that you couldn't fund getting to compliance. It was the fact you had to be over and above compliance on your own as additional storage under SPG. So it wasn't funding you to become compliant. Whatever storage you built under SPG had to be over and above, independent of what storage you had on the farm in the first place.
So both schemes are the same then?
Well, with this particular scheme, we are not asking farmers to come up. We are not really looking at whether farmers are SAFO compliant or not. We are just concentrating on roofing areas to reduce water. So with SAFO compliance, you know, we are not asking what the slurry store is, looking at slurry store. You know, for instance, if we're supporting a collecting yard, all we are doing is supporting that collecting yard. The farm, at the end of, after receiving this grant, might or might not be SAFO compliant. We are not. That is not the purpose of the scheme. The purpose of the scheme is focusing on, by reducing the volume of slurry, it inevitably will help farmers to become compliant or improve their compliant levels, whatever that may be.
So what happens if you get an inspection at the end of the grant scheme? You know, I presume some will get an inspection and it's found out that they're not SAFO compliant?
Farmers that receive this grant and are eligible and go through game are likely to get an inspection either before claim or after claim. That inspection will be purely looking at, has that farm met the conditions of the grant? So have they erected the roof? Do they is the water from the roof going into a clean water drain? And is the effluent from that area going to the slurry store? That is all. They will not be looking at the farm SAFWA compliance, that will be totally outside the remit.
Good, thank you.
I think the confusion with the SAFWA compliance and what I was saying and what Richard was saying, my worry, not worry with it, but what you need to consider, it's not are you getting to compliance by roofing the yard, it's are you affecting any of the current structures that will jeopardize their existing compliance or their exemption. So if you're building onto a slurry store or a clamp in particular, the issue is, you know, think about that work and don't jeopardize the structure. And that's the compliance issue, not are you going to achieve compliance by roofing the yard. As Richard said, the point of the roofing is to help farms get closer to compliance. But if an NRW inspection happens down the road and you've plonked a roof on top of a Earthbank lagoon, they are going to ask you some awkward questions about why, when and how. So the compliance issues I was talking about in my presentation are more to do with don't jeopardize your current situation. But as Richard says, the grant is basically looking at reducing the dirty water as long as it's going into a storage system and you're heading down the road to compliance. If you're not already compliant, that's what the grant is aimed at. The SAFWA situation is only don't jeopardize or make your problem worse with the structures you've got when you get an NRW inspection. Yes, Rich?
Yes, yeah, absolutely, yeah. So we you know, just to make sure, any inspection that we do for the grant is not looking at SAFWA compliant. It's looking at meeting the conditions of this grant.
Thank you for clarifying that. So we'll move on to the next question. Do you have to get quotes for work to go in with the application?
The reason that we've gone down this route and setting a standard cost is that takes away the requirement through a grant scheme for you to go out and get 3 quotes. So the answer is no, you don't have to get 3 quotes. We would suggest that that's probably best value for you, for the farm to get value for money. We would recommend that you get quotes, but from our grant scheme and in terms of your claim, no, we don't need 3 quotes, just the final invoice.
Okay, thank you. Next question then. As the roof would be grant funded, are there any restrictions for future uses of the roof, specifically installing solar panels?
No, none on solar panels. That is on that. The only restriction is the use of the building after we erect the roof. So in any future inspection that you get, we expect the building to be used for the intended purposes that we've supported it for.
Is there a specific number of years that it should be used for that purpose?
5 years. 5 years.
Yeah, thank you. Are we eligible to make an application for the farm business grant to cover yards and manure storage if already been successful in a sustainable production grant towards developing a slurry pit with cover and storage for 5 to 6 months within another project?
If it's different areas, you will be eligible. If you were, this very much depends on so I don't want to go into the details of individual cases, but it depends whether if you put an application in and not received a contract, that will have an impact on an SPG application that's pending. If you've received an SPG contract, you would still be eligible to apply, but we will be doing cross checks from yard coverings to current SPG applications.
Okay, diolch. For SUDS, can you put in some sort of rainscaping system where a ditch is purpose-built to capture runoff in order to slow it down, planted up with trees, etc., to allow water to gradually soak away?
Basically, yes, but you're going to have to prove it. It's all about flow rate and volumes. So there's a calculation element to it as well. So it's not just a barrier ditch and then it goes to a soak away. There's a set calculation flow rate that you need to work out. But that type of scenario is exactly what they're looking for. Basically, it's controlling flow rate and then how you're controlling the rate to soak away or ditch.
Okay, can the work be completed by the farmer?
Yeah, I think I've half answered that question before. Yes. So if the farmer purchases the building in kit form and erects it, yes, he can do that. Is okay. If the farmer manufactures the actual structure, he will need to get some engineering certificate to prove that it's up to British standards. So yes, he can. There are elements of there depending on, you know, what's it? Is it the whole building or doing elements of it? But it as long as at claim stage we can evidence what has been purchased and the items are new and it's up to the right standards, that will be eligible.
Okay, based upon the level of interest and numbers online tonight, the budget of 1.5 million looks very small. It looks like it would only support a very small number of those who are here tonight. What will the budget be for the second window?
For the second, we've got 2 million for the second window. So there's 3.5 million currently allocated to the scheme. You know, there would appear to be quite a lot of demand for this scheme. I think it's new. The application window is coming quite next week. I think it is up to us then. Once the first application window has gone through, we've issued some contracts. We'll review where we are and try and understand the demand, what further demand is there, and there'll be some decisions that we have to make for the future. But it's better to have more people wanting to apply for it than having a budget and not enough people wanting to apply. So it is a nice headache to have.
Okay, thank you. If you don't have any current storage system, for example, if your muck store is just stored on a concrete pad on yard, you're not eligible for a new roof.
This legally, if your muck store is on a concrete yard at the moment, you are legally under the regulations producing slurry and you should be collecting it in some way, shape or form. By roofing it, you are becoming legal because depending on how you get the muck from A to B, if you carry the muck to the muck store, then once it's in a roofed area, that's fine. If you're scraping to that muck store, that's a different scenario. But currently, in that situation, you are in breach of regulation. So, what do you think, Reg? I think it should be eligible, to be honest, because it's exactly the thing you're trying to do. As long as that new area is undercover and the muck is carried to it, then you are becoming compliant.
In those circumstances, the photographs, first thing we want to be sure is that that is a muck store and it's not a piece of concrete that an application is coming up to roof it when it's not a muck store. So by having evidence that effluent is collected, it also gives us confidence that actually that is a muck store. In those circumstances, we are, you know, those are areas we can see the benefits of covering them. So I'm not going to commit one way or the other on that, but you know, those would need good photographs to show what the area, what's been used for, and really what's happening with that area at the moment. Before we
normally in that type of circumstance, you'll normally have some, whether it's two walls in a corner, so you'll normally have some sort of area where you are scraping to, rather than just leaving it on an open yard. So you'll have some form of containment. So at that point, I think then it's up to Welsh Government then to make an assessment on, is it or isn't it?
Yeah, I think we haven't judged a grant like the infrastructure grant through photographs before. The first window come in will be an interesting experience to get an understanding of what you're getting through. So I'm going back to one of my key messages earlier. Clear photographs. Take them at a time when don't go out in the dark or the last minute to take a photograph. Take it in plenty of time. Show it to someone to make sure, yeah, that does show this, and include it in the application. And then, we'll consider eligibility then as they come through.
Okay, leading on from the photos, then there's a question here about regarding geotagged photos. Does this have to be taken after the contract is accepted, like the small grants?
No, the geotag photographs will have to be taken as part of the expression of interest.
Thank you. Can you claim for a covered slurry store and covered feeding area in the same claim?
Yes, up to the maximum grant.
Okay, thank you. Can you make an application prior to obtaining planning?
Yes. Yeah, yes.
Good. I like these straightforward answers.
Yeah, I like these as well.
to be honest, I think most of them will be prior to achieving planning, because that will take time. It's best to apply and then get the planning ball rolling as soon as you can, I would suggest.
There's a question here on how can we find further information on water quality maps for scoring?
Those maps are published on the Welsh Government website under the Glasstir tab. So they're Glasstir Advanced Maps. So those are online and available.
Diolch. Are the secondary items included in the 12,000 or in separate?
Within the 12,000. But these are, except for the water harvesting systems, they are low-cost items, so we say, in terms of being paid per metre length of gutter or metre length of cross drains. So they will be. We would expect that the main bulk of an application will be the roof.
Could I add, with the queries on SUDS, water harvesting systems may be something worth looking at, because if you can prove that you're not, any of the runoff from the new roof is leaving, the building, you're using it on the farm to, wash down water or drinking water, as long as the washed down water is being collected, that may be an option under SUDS to prove that, you don't need any drainage scheme to get rid of the roof water. It's worth having a look at.
Thank you. Do all dirty yards have to be covered by concrete already? Yes.
So it's concrete, or there might be some circumstances that other material, impermeable surfaces, hot rolled asphalt, I suppose, for some silage pits in some circumstances, but it has to, and we would expect the photograph to demonstrate the flooring as well. So a flooring, if we see a floor of a collecting yard with a foot of muck on it, without being able to see the flooring, we would be able to approve or offer a grant on that basis. We need to show what the flooring is, and if that means you have to wash a part of the concrete to show it, that will make our life much easier and give us an option to support, as opposed to ask for the questions or refuse an application.
Okay. If I have a cattle yard that cannot be totally roofed, do I have to roof 100% of the yard to obtain the grant?
No, I wouldn't say so.
No.
No. Diolch. Please clarify the size of the roofed area to achieve the maximum grant.
I think it's about over 300 meters squared to get the maximum.
I think it's about 335 square meters. I think somewhere like that.
Okay, thank you. Because shed roofing makers and erectors are so busy, what happens if I couldn't get anybody to make or erect the shed within 1 year?
Right, well, I'll cover two questions here, because I'm sure a similar question will come up later on planning. We're giving 12 months to finish the work on the contract. The reason for that really is that once you get a contract, we allocate that budget to your holding. If that budget is not used, we lose it, basically. So that is where the deadlines come in all the time. If you get a contract and are unable to get a contractor to do the work, the message to us would be to inform us of any problems that you're having, but also to, if you came to us in month 10 and said, sorry, I can't get a contractor, the contract will be, and you don't meet the contract requirements, it's hard for us to give an extension or consider any other option other than to withdraw the contract. If there's documentary evidence from month 1 showing the effort and the conversations and everything else, at least then we can consider that on a case-by-case basis. On the same situation then regarding planning, because I'm sure this will probably another question that's probably on the list. If you are unable to erect the roof because you haven't had planning approval within the 12 months period, what we'd expect you is to let us know what the situation is if you're having difficulties. And again, we'll consider it on a case-by-case basis. If, again, you came to us later on in the contract and said, I've just put a planning application in and I don't expect it back for another 6 months, it's hard for us to do anything other than withdraw that contract. But if you've submitted a planning application very quickly, early in the process, and I've been following that up with the local authority throughout the period and still haven't had a decision, obviously then we're sympathetic then that it's outside your control, and then if you inform us of what's happening as early as possible, then we can respond to that then.
Okay, I'll carry on because we still got a lot of questions left unanswered. What if putting a roof over the feed area will reduce the slurry to such an extent that it becomes farmyard manure? Do you still qualify?
You won't reduce the slurry to such an effect it becomes farmyard manure, because if it's outside in a slurry store, it's still slurry.
Thank you. If you are in the process of updating your slurry pit with a slatted tank with a roof in the same place as the old pit, would that be eligible?
If it's replacement roof, it's not eligible. So no, any replacement of an existing roof is not eligible.
We have been told that our farmyard manure store is not compliant for farm assurance as it's pre-91, just a concrete pad and not collecting runoff. This means that we are not eligible for this grant, but dairy farmers who could already be compliant are able to get funding, but to become compliant, we have to fund it all ourselves. Is that true?
Again, we are not, the eligibility of the scheme is not based on current or future compliance. That similar question we answered earlier, which is this area of whether a pad with a farmyard manure storage without a tank is eligible or not. We would judge that based on the photographs we received. And we'll have to make a decision on eligibility. In
that particular case, if they've got an exempt muck store that has possibly 2 walls but isn't causing pollution, that's not doing anything wrong. If they're managing it, then that's fine. But it's all about the management and the photos. If it's pre-91 and it's being managed, and it's classed as exempt, and there's no risk of pollution from it, then it shouldn't be a problem.
Okay, I'm putting up a roof over my cattle yard next month. Can I apply for grant even though I have already done the work? didn't know this grant was available now, or I would have I would have waited.
Yeah, I'm sympathetic, but unfortunately, no. I'm afraid the work we can, unfortunately, no.
Okay. Where can we get advice about dealing with slurry on a pre and post milking loafing yard adjacent to a small scale, less than 100 dairy sheep milking parlour?
Is that a Family Connect question? I think back to you, Edwin.
Yeah.
I should answer that. Yes,
Yeah.
you can by all means contact Farming Connect, the development officer or the service centre, and we'll put you in touch with an expert. So the next question, additionally, will I still be eligible for the grant if the NRW wants me to decommission the slurry store from a beef farmer?
Well, if
are they looking to cover the slurry store, or it depends what they're thinking of doing.
Again, perhaps that's a question.
Yeah, that's a bit of a specific.
Yeah, for an hour slot with an advisor just to go through.
I think you can clarify that once you know the specifics of what they've actually been told by NRW.
So again, come to Farming Connect for that help. What about the side sheets of the roofing shed? As the rain blows in from the side, is in the muck store as well?
Side sheets, we are supporting the roof cover, but the side sheets, if you can, they are not an eligible item for the grant, but we are paying a fixed cost for the roofing. If the farmer can fund side sheets as well from that cost, that is up to the farmer to do that. But the grant, the standard cost is based on uprights and roofing.
Okay. Can you cover an existing wood chip corral? Water drains through the wood chip to a store and there is a concrete feeding area?
No. The rule there is we require evidence that is a concrete floor.
Are you able to apply in multiple windows?
The maximum grant is £12,000. For this, the guidance for the second window will clarify that one. The current FBG is that you can have multiple application up to your maximum grant.
So coming on to the next question leading from that one, is the 12,000 maximum grant per application or per farm?
Per farm.
Thank you. What type of rainwater harvesting equipment could be purchased? Say we put a roof to cover an open feeding area between two sheds, then collected the rainwater from the new roof and the sheds either side.
Again, with the rainwater harvesting systems, we've got two options where there's a standard cost against both options. One would be your basic outside tank. There's a minimum size and minimum criteria for that tank. And the second option is a more expensive, an underground tank and a bigger capacity. So as long as the rainwater harvesting system meets the specification that we've put in the guidance, there's flexibility in terms of where you locate it and how, but as long as it meets the minimum in terms of having a filter, minimum size, where the outflow goes and so on, we're not going to specify where or how it's put, to just meet the minimum specification and obviously evidence it through invoices and photographs.
It'll still need SUDS approval as well, mind. They still have to say that they accept that. So that it's not just a way of avoiding SUDS. You still have to go to SUDS and say, right, this is what I'm doing.
Okay, thank you both. If work is, oops, the question disappeared in front of me there. I don't know how. That's gone. Okay. How flexible is this scheme in terms of submitting claims? As of my experience, many farmers has lost out in the past with FBG, some because they simply hadn't submitted the accountant letter clarifying that the business turnover is less than 1 million on the time. Personally, you must be more flexible, especially during this pandemic. How many farmers' turnover is less than 1 million?
Right, in terms of flexibility, the contract, there will be a claim date, a deadline. If there's any issues that a farmer cannot claim by that date, let us know and engage with us so that we know there is a problem or there is a delay. In terms of the guidance, the contracts, there will be reminders sent out to farmers as well in terms of the claim date approaching. So we'll be doing everything we can to make sure that nobody misses out on the deadline or does not submit any claims or the supporting information. So, we were doing everything in I can to make it as simple as possible, really, and to remind farmers.
Thank you. I am conscious of the time. It's coming up to 9 o'clock, but I can see we've only got 8 questions left to ask. So I think we'll carry on if that's okay with you both. If work is carried out by the farmer, buying kit from building and self-erecting, would the grant be paid by total of the invoice or the standard cost per square metre?
Standard cost per square metre.
Thank you. Is the secondary funding, e.g. guttering, eligible on the new roof?
No. The standard cost for the new roof, we would expect the guttering and downpipes to be included because the expectation is that the rainwater is collected and diverted. So the secondary items are only eligible for other existing buildings.
Okay, thank you. Can you build off an existing building to cover muck store or gathering area?
We are aware that, you know, a lot of these areas, especially collecting yards or feeding areas, will be odd shaped. They'll be bordering onto existing buildings. So there will be, we will be supporting some lean-to buildings, some standalone buildings, and combination of both. So it is what's appropriate for the area, really, as long as we're still paying on the roof. Possibly some will be more expensive, requiring more uprights, but we're still based the grant on the standard cost. So if they are neighbouring on an existing building and a roof coming off that building, it's still eligible.
I think the majority will be like that, to be honest. And you know, the muck stores maybe and slurry stores may be different, but the majority of the yard areas will be connected in some way, shape, or form. I doubt very many will be freestanding.
Okay. If the shed is large enough to claim the full 12,000 and it costs us 17,000 to complete, is that okay?
Yes, if you go over the grant, we'll cap the grant level to the maximum.
Okay, can you do 2 muck store covers within the grant?
If you are supporting 2 separate areas, as long there is an option in the application to go for 2 items. So it'll be put it twice in effect, 2 different areas, because we'll need 2 sets of photographs on for both areas. But supporting 2 separate areas or more is eligible.
Thank you. If you have a muck store but don't collect any slurry, will you be eligible?
I think we've gone back to, I think there's probably the third similar question, really, and I think the answer is we'll have to deal with those on an individual basis based on the photographs that we receive.
I think the criteria will be if you can prove that the existing area is not causing pollution. I think that's where you're going to, if you can show in the photographic evidence that the existing muck store is either holding the water and you're controlling it, or there's nothing seeping out of it or running off, that will help with the case, I would imagine, Rich.
You know, the intention is to support, you know, to reduce pollution, and so those areas are, you know, they are areas that will make a difference to the farm. So, you know, it's based on the photographs that we receive.
Thank you. And we're actually, this is the last question for the night. Does the current yard have to be concrete or can it be tarmac?
It can be tarmac. as long as it's impermeable to water and can demonstrate, and that is demonstrated in the photographs, so we can evidence it.
And actually, I've lied to you because another question has come in. I don't know if you'll be able to answer this question. Actually, it says, as tenant farmers, who is responsible for being SAFL compliant? Do you know?
Well, I'm having a lot of this at the moment with local authority farms. I'm tending to find most local authorities are helping out, or a lot of them are looking for the advice through the reports to find out which is the most economical way to get them to compliance, then using the report as evidence with the landlord and the tenant to come to an arrangement as to what the difficulty is on local authority holdings. Is the tenant normally owns other land outside, so it's what percentage are actually rented. But I think the way it's working at the moment is if they've got the report, they can use that then and price it. So it's a tricky one, and depending on individual circum. Again, it's one you can talk about off air, you know, and we can have a sort of private conversation about it. I think that would be the best way.
Yes, okay. So I think there's some questions coming in again, but I think actually we've, yeah, I've been asking questions to you for over, I don't know, 40 minutes, I think. So do you want to take some more questions? Or
I don't mind if you want to take them.
Yeah, I don't mind.
If you are ineligible for the grant, are farmers going to be targeted by NRW?
No, is the answer. You know, this is a grant. There's no link in terms of what we are doing. You know, we are not transferring information to NRW. This is a Welsh Government grant. So nobody will, you know, except the occasional official that looks at it, nobody will know who's eligible or not. And that information, you know, data protection, that will not go nowhere.
The information submitted, as with the stuff that goes through Farming Connect, is confidential. Everybody knows NRW are in the process of visiting farms in Wales because of the situation. I can't see how they won't look at this as positively, because it's however severe or not severe the situation is, every item that is built here will improve it. So I can't see them being negative about it. They will see it as the farm taking the first steps towards getting to where they need to be, but there's no link between the two.
Can you please comment on the 335 metre square size? It's not very big.
Right. The grant level of up to £12,000, it's a balance. To be able to deliver a scheme, a simple scheme based on a standard cost, this budget is RDP, so European funded, still European funded. If we extended that 12,000 limit, we're then into the realms of having to get 3 quotes and a business plan, and we're down the route of the current SPG, where the limit is up to 40,000. So by going up to £12,000, which works out as a limit of 330 square meters, it enables us to deliver a scheme on a fixed cost basis. So it's a balance between, if a farm wants a significantly higher roof, the SPG is available for that investment, and there is an application window opening early 2021.
Okay, I'm just going to do 2 final questions. So I will be closing the meeting after this, I promise. So this is about scoring the application. Is there any bearing given to proximity to SSSIs, triple SIs?
Good question. I'm not sure if I can answer that off the top of my head, because that might be considered in the way the actual Glastir maps are produced and the scoring layers in the maps. But I can't give you an answer one way, confirm that one way or the other.
Okay, thank you. If my existing manure store is too near a watercourse, could I get a grant to move it away from the watercourse?
Unfortunately not. Not through this grant scheme, because it's covering existing areas and not building new. However, the SPG window is opening in the new year, and you would be eligible to build a new store through that support.
Good. Well, thank you both for answering all those questions so thoroughly. As I mentioned at the beginning, we have been grouping those questions as they've been coming in. So they some of you might think, your question hasn't been specifically answered. But we will be providing written answers to those questions, and again grouping them under the sort of frequently asked questions, and they will be up on the Farming Connect website as soon as we can. But if you've got any specific questions, then as I said, our surgeries is an option if you just want to discuss something in an hour. But if you want more detailed support from Farming Connect, then the advisory service, which is 80% funded, up to €1,500, or if you're working as a group of farmers, it's 100% funded. So I'd like to thank both of you, Richard and Keith, for the presentations and for answering all the questions we've had in tonight. Also, thank Fionn and Ellen for supporting me with all the questions that came in and actually supporting the technology tonight. I know it didn't quite perhaps work as it should with the translation, but I hope everybody could follow. And if you need any other information, then please contact us and we'll do our best to get the information you have missed to you. Diolch yn fawr iawn I chi gyd am droi lan i'r cyfarfod heno. I'd like to thank you all for giving up of your time and coming to the meeting tonight. And I hope you'll be successful in this grant application. And again, if anything we can do as Farming Connect to support you, please contact us. Cofiwch gysylltu os oes unrhyw beth mae Cyswllt Ffermio yn gallu gwneud I helpu chi. Diolch yn fawr iawn I chi am roi eich amser I ddod heno a pob lwc I chi gyda'r cais. Diolch yn fawr iawn.